Day Street Books and HarperAudio present The McCartney Legacy, Volume 2, 1974-80, by Alan Cousin and Adrian Sinclair. Read by Simon Vance. A note before we begin. Don't forget to download the accompanying enhancement PDF from your audiobook provider. It contains a bibliography, discography, selected videography, and more. For Linda, Henry, Jimmy, and Denny. Introduction. When Now and Then was issued as the last Beatles single on November 2nd, 2023, its release was covered in the press globally as a major event, as if the band had not broken up 53 years earlier. But then, the Beatles are always in the news, aren't they? Documentaries like 8 Days a Week and Peter Jackson's epic Get Back, or the remixes and archival issues of several of their albums, or Cirque du Soleil's Love Show. The Fab Four are never far from a spotlight, even though only 2 of them still walk among us. One interesting element of the Now and Then story, from our perspective, is the degree to which it was a Paul McCartney project. The song was John Lennon's, composed and recorded on a cassette as a demo in 1977 or 1978, during the period covered in this volume. And McCartney, along with George Harrison and Ringo Starr, had tried to make something of it in the mid-1990s, when they transformed 2 other Lennon demos, Free as a Bird and Real Love, into updated Beatles tracks. But unlike the others, Now and Then was a terrible recording, afflicted with a buzz that could not be eliminated using 1990s technology, so it was shelved. The way McCartney tells it, the incomplete track had always nagged at him as unfinished business. When Peter Jackson developed a machine-assisted learning MAL program during the making of Get Back, that allowed him to separate the components within mono recordings. McCartney saw a way to save Now and Then. Lennon's vocal could be lifted from the track to replace the recording Paul, George and Ringo tried to expand upon in 1995. George Harrison's rhythm guitar from those sessions could be preserved. Paul and Ringo could add new parts, and harmony vocals from Beatles tracks could be lifted and repurposed. That was not Paul's only use for Jackson's technology. He had the director make a remixed clip of I've Got a Feeling from the Beatles' 1969 rooftop concert, with only John's vocal on the soundtrack so that Paul could perform a virtual duet of the song with a celluloid Lennon on tour. All this represents an approach to the Beatles and an involvement in being a Beatle that would have been unthinkable to the Paul McCartney we write about in this volume. When the book begins, Paul's musical persona was wrapped up in wings for a number of reasons, ranging from a desire to establish the group as its own musical entity to the psychic pain that the Beatles still represented for him. So he refused to perform songs he wrote that the Beatles recorded. That changed when he included a handful of Beatles tunes on the set list for Wings' 1975-76 world tour. But he was still left to fend off the ghost of the Beatles at nearly every interview and press conference, and promoters seemed to mark the change of seasons by proposing increasingly lucrative offers for the Beatles to reunite. Paul's responses to journalists' obsession with the Beatles' reunion change over the period covered in this volume, often depending on the state of his disentanglement from Apple and his relationships with the others. But even when he is at his most open to the possibility of doing something, a show or a recording, it is hard to imagine him being the one pushing to complete the last Beatles single. That was a luxury he had as an octogenarian who can legitimately claim to have enjoyed one of the most successful
Sample complete. Ready to continue?